Let me put it this way. I'd like to think that God is real.
I don't believe in God because the idea that an omniscient, loving being would judge me, who is mortal and ignorant, based on a few years' experience, I find to be rather a cruel thought.
All the power that God has, he, she, it has given to me. So we're definitely one.
I hope there's something else out there. It'd be fun to experience either that or we're all just evolved apes.
I
was raised atheist. I don't believe in a higher power, but I also don't claim to know everything about the world.
I don't know. I don't know if there is one. I just pretend, I guess, and hope that there's something else out there.
There we go. This morning, as we continue on our series, Explore God, we are going to what is perhaps the most foundational question of all of the 7 questions that we're going to be looking at, and that is there a God? And I say this is perhaps the most foundational because our answer to this question will shape certainly our answers to every other question of faith and of religion that we would ask about. And I just want to let you know this morning that wherever you fall on this spectrum, which was kind of a spectrum of beliefs that people have about God represented in that video, we are glad that you are here. For many of you this morning, you will have no problem with this topic. You'll say, yes, I believe in God. There's no doubt in my mind. We're glad you're here. For some of you, you would say, yeah, I grew up in a religious home in Christianity. I'm still here, but there's always been questions. I've always had this undergirding sense of doubt and of questions that just don't seem to be answered for me. And we're glad you're here. We want your faith to grow deeper, and we're glad you're doing that. And for some of you, maybe you have no religious background, or you left a religious background, and you would say, I don't really think God is real, but I'm open to thinking about it. And I want to at least consider it. We're happy that you're here, and we hope this is a safe space for you to kind of explore these ideas of what the Bible and what God teaches. Before we jump into kind of thinking more in depth about this topic, is there a God? I find it helpful to kind of get a survey of where Americans land on this idea of God and of a belief in God. A few years ago, Pew Research did what they call their religious landscape study, a study of over 35,000 U.S. Americans and their beliefs in God. And they were simply asked the question, do you believe in God, and how certain are you? 63% of people say they believe in God and they are absolutely certain. This is of Americans. Another 20% say they believe in God and are fairly certain. So 83% have, with some degree of high confidence, a belief in a God. I'm not talking about Christianity here, but just in a God that exists in the world. Another 5% said that they believe, but they're not really certain about it. 2% say they don't know. And 9% of people say they do not believe in God, right? And so there is certainly a percentage of that in our world today. And so if you don't believe in God, you're not a huge minority. That's about 15 to 20% of people would say, I don't really know, or I don't think there is. What's fascinating to me, and sociologists have studied them a lot closer the last decade, is what is called religious nuns. Religious nuns. By the way, that's nun, N-O-N-E-S. Some of you are like, of course nuns are religious. That's why they're nuns. No. These would be nuns who don't practice the religious beliefs of nuns who don't practice any religion. They don't attend any church. They would ask, I have no religious beliefs at all. Of those who say that, 27% believe with certainty that God exists, and another 22% believe fairly certainly that God exists. And this is a reminder that if you meet someone who says, I don't believe in any religion, it doesn't automatically mean that they don't believe in the existence of God at all. In fact, there's a 50% chance, at least, that they have a fairly confident belief that there is some sort of higher being, there is a God. A Gallup poll a few years ago found a similar thing. They said that 81% of people in the U.S. believe in God. Now, the interesting thing about them is they've been surveying this country in the U.S. for decades, and so they can trace back to in the 1950s and 60s, which I don't remember, but there's some of us here this morning who do. The answer to this question was 98%. Of people said yes. And so we certainly see a rise in those who are at least uncertain or don't believe in the existence of God in the U.S., certainly 30 and especially 50 years ago. Well, as we explore this question this morning, we're going to kind of start big picture and then get narrower as we walk through this. And the first thing I want us to think about is kind of our worldview as we come to just even approaching this question. And I want to propose to you this morning, that no matter where you are and what you believe in about this question, the first thing on your outline is we all live by faith. No matter what your belief in God is or not, we all live by faith. There are primarily two kind of big picture worldviews in which people live and view the world. On one side, you would have a religious worldview. Again, this is not specific to Christianity, but just any worldview that says, I expect that there is some sort of supernatural, higher power, higher intelligent being outside of myself that is responsible for at least some of the things that we see in the world today. Believes in a spiritual reality. Is someone with a religious worldview. The opposite from that is someone who would say they have a secular worldview. Sometimes this is called a materialistic or a humanistic worldview that would deny spiritual realities, deny even the possibility of an existence of them, and say that everything that we see and observe has a scientific and materialistic explanation for how the world operates, and that is how the world is to be explained. Now, what the problem is that both of these sides, religious backgrounds and secular worldviews, these are often characterized to have certain sort of views that I don't think are true to either one of them. Now, you may have known someone, you may have heard someone, and maybe this is your story yourself, that you grew up in a religious household, you were taught religious things to have faith in God, and then you left home, you probably went to a university or a college, you met some professors, met some friends who were very smart, and they taught you to think. And then now that you think, you no longer believe in God because you've rejected your faith because you've been taught how to think. See, in our world, kind of a natural assumption of people, and particularly those who are of the secular mindset, is that if you believe there is a God, that is a statement of faith. That you have faith in a God. But if you say, nope, I believe there is no God, that is a statement of reason. So you have faith for religious people, but if you're secular, you have reason. The reality is that is a false dichotomy, that no matter what side you are on, how you have arrived and how you live your life and your worldview is a combination of both faith and reason. Right? Religious people have faith. They also have critical thinking and reason. Secular people have reason, and they also have faith and live by faith as well. Now, there's this idea that especially that will often come from a secular mindset that comes towards people who are religious. And it often comes in different ways and phrases, but a common phrase is this: well, I would believe in God if you could prove his existence. Have any of you ever heard that before or something like that? Like, I would believe if you could prove. In other words, I'm a rational person. If you can show me how this has to be, then of course I'm a rational person, so I'll go with where the proof is. Here's the thing. You can't prove the existence of God. But here's the other thing. You can't prove either that God doesn't exist. Right? You cannot prove either side. If you're here to think, I'm going to empirically prove to you that God exists, prepare to be disappointed this morning. I'm sorry. But there's this idea that some people have that you can't believe something unless it can be empirically proven. You shouldn't believe something unless it can be empirically proven. You know the problem? That statement cannot be empirically proven to be true. Their own logic is circular in reasoning, and the foundation for their very thinking does not even back up on itself. The reality is, no matter what worldview you live with, we all base our lives on beliefs that we cannot prove 100%. We all, no matter if you're religious or secular, every single person in the world bases their life on beliefs that we cannot prove to be true. A popular way to demonstrate this that's been primarily popular in the last 25 years or so is the belief that the world as you see it is real. That how you exist, the world you're living in right now is real. And if you know which popular movie I'm referencing, you know this has become popular because most of us have seen or know of the ideas of the movie The Matrix, right? Which explore this idea, is the life you're living real, Or is this a simulation and you actually really exist in a different dimension? Now, here's the thing. There's no way to prove that this life you're living right now is actually your real life. Some of you are having like a crisis of identity. You're like, what is going on? I don't mean to scare you, right? But you can't prove that. You cannot 100% prove it. But why does every human being wake up not having an existential crisis and assuming that I'm waking up and the feet I'm stepping on my ground are actually my feet? It's a faith assumption. Now, it's a faith assumption with good reasons behind it, right? But it ultimately is a faith assumption. We cannot 100% prove that it is true. No matter your belief or worldview, you use a combination of reason and faith. That if you are a religious person, yes, you are a person of faith, but there are good reasons, there's good background, there's good argumentation for your faith. You don't believe blindly. And if you are a secular person, yes, there's reasons that you would argue for, but ultimately you also are living your life by faith as well. I love how Tim Keller put it in his book, Making Sense of God. He put it this way: to move from religion to secularism is not so much a loss of faith as a shift to a new set of beliefs into a new community of faith, just one that draws the lines between orthodoxy and heresy in different places. But whether you're a religious person or a secular person, you are a person of faith living in a community of faith. Now, if this idea of faith and secularism compels you and you want to study this and draw from this more, I've been greatly helped. I just quoted him. Tim Keller, his two books, Making Sense of God, and the book, The Reason for God. If you're not so much a reader, I'd invite you, go ahead and if you YouTube Tim Keller and Google Talks, he gave talks when each of these books came out. One is about 5 years ago, one is about 15 years ago at Google headquarters, on giving them talks about underlying the arguments for his books and why he believes that believing in God is a rational thing, not just a leap of faith. And in that, he makes this argument, which others certainly have made as well, and I think it's true, that to not believe in God takes just as much faith as to believe in God. In fact, many say to not believe in God takes more faith than belief in God. Now, I'm not going to get up here. I don't particularly care. It doesn't matter ultimately who has more faith or not. But I want us to see that every single one of us, regardless of how we live our lives, regardless of our worldview, all of us have faith. That's a foundation for human existence. But because religious people are not just those who live by faith alone, the second thing I want us to look at this morning are there are good reasons to believe in God. That people who believe in the existence of God are not just those who take this leap of faith, but have used rational, critical, good thinking skills that can lead them there or can at least give them security that their belief in God is a rational and the proper belief that explains how life is. Now, I'm going to lead us through in the next few minutes 5 different what are called arguments, although I'm not arguing, but 5 different arguments of reasons that that the existence of God is a rational thing. And if you've ever studied what's called apologetics, not like apologizing, but the argumentation for something, many of you may be in a high school class or in a college classroom, or you've read books on this. Many, if not all, of these arguments will be familiar to you. These are certainly not new by me. So what are some good reasons to believe in the existence of God? One is this, it's called the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument. And in the cosmological argument, what they say, basically the thinking is that the universe demands a causal explanation for how this came to be, and that the first cause must exist beyond the universe is the most likely thing. A famous proponent of this was the thinker Thomas Aquinas, and he used this idea of something in motion. That when you perceive something in motion, you think to yourself, something caused that to move. And when you see the things in motion in our world, we should go back and say, well, there must be a first mover that started everything else in motion that exists in the universe and in our world. Logically, you say, yes, most people will not argue with you that there's motion, that there's causes, that there's things happening in our world. And logically, you cannot continue just to have an infinite regress of causes, that it just keeps infinitely going back. And guess what? If you argue that it just infinitely goes back, that's a statement of faith that you can't prove. Right? Because none of us were there. We can't prove it just goes on forever. But what is one of, if not, I would argue, the more likely cause is that there was something at the beginning itself that caused everything else, that there's something at the beginning that caused the motion, the change that we see in the world. A modern scholar who's done a lot of work on this is a man named William Lane Craig, who's a professor at Biola University. And his framing of this cosmological argument, which is so clear, I love it. He says, everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Again, maybe people would argue, well, you can't prove the universe began to exist, to which you could say, well, you can't prove it didn't. Right? Like you can't prove otherwise. It's a statement of faith if you think that the universe has eternally existed. So that's the cosmological argument, an argument that because we see causal things, there must be something that started it all. A second argument for belief in God is what is often called an argument from design. Design, or classically is often put a fine-tuning argument. And this is this idea that when you see something with an incredible, thoughtful design, your natural assumption is that someone designed it to be and to function and to look that way. This could go into many, many different ways and many details. I'm married to a graphic designer, and I have learned that when you see words on paper, there is much more thought and intentionality that went into it than I ever thought in how things are portrayed and look. There is a reason for the design of things because there's someone behind it designing it. And what the argument from design says is that when you look at the complexities of our life and the universe that exists, the most probable cause is that there is someone or something that designed it to function that way. And there's thinkers that argue for this in a few different ways. One of which, who I'm fascinated by his argumentation, is a man named Hugh Ross, who has a place called Reasons to Believe that offers arguments for the existence of God. He's an astrophysicist, and he argues from his knowledge and studies of space, universe, and galaxies that prove the complexity of a designer. That he says when you start to really get into it and observe the universe that we live in, it's hard to come to the conclusion that this just happened and that there isn't an intelligent being that created all of this. By the way, if you're a Christian, you know Psalm 19 says that what the heavens declare the glory of God, right? But this is scientifically looking and showing that the universe, the galaxies show this. Kind of on the opposite side, so that's huge galaxies, the world universe shows this. On a very small scale, a man named Stephen Meyer is a big proponent of what is called intelligent design, and he's probably the main voice to it. And his background is in molecular biology and in studying DNA. And his studying of DNA, he says that DNA has shown that our life is far more complex than we ever would have thought 50 or 100 years ago. Right? Human existence is far more complex. And an intelligent designer is a much more likely cause than simply evolutionary chance that arrived for how your human body exists and functions to this day. By the way, Stephen Meyer was just on the most downloaded and listened to podcast in the world, Joe Rogan, about a month or two ago. His 2.5-hour conversation with a person of a secular worldview is fascinating. If you've never listened to it and you want to study more about what intelligent design has to say. One of the thinkings of intelligent design is this concept called irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity, meaning that when you look at the number of complex systems in the human body that all have to function together at the same time for life to exist, they couldn't have risen independent from one another. They rely on one another to exist. It's so well designed, it's almost as if someone designed it that way. The classic argument before even DNA and things were invented is just, hey, if you were out for a walk and you saw a watch laying on the sidewalk and you picked it up, your first gut instinct wouldn't be to say, wow, what a miracle this is, that the wood and the rocks, that they all happen to be shifted and shaped in this way that it perfectly tells time. No, you would pick it up and you look and say like, hey, someone made this. And the argument is, well, our universe and your body is far more complex than a watch is. And so the natural implications is that someone designed it to be that way. A third argument for the existence of God is called the argument from morality, from morals. C.S. Lewis put forth this argument in his book, Mere Christianity, and largely popularized this about 60 years ago. And this argument is that there are binding moral obligations in the world. Moral law exists. And because there are objectively binding moral obligations, God or a moral lawgiver must also exist in our world as well. This brings together, many say this is one of, if not the strongest arguments, because it brings together both rational thinking and personal experience in our lives as well. Right? Rationally, we get that, hey, they're an objective moral standard, but it's personal as well, because evolutionary and secular thought has a problem here. Right? And so what happens here is people can deny the reality of absolute morality. Right? I've met many people who are like, well, there is no such thing as morals. You can't convince me of moral truth or not. And what you can just gently do is you can push them to the conclusions of their own thought. You can say, okay, do you have a problem if I kill you right now? Like, well, yeah, I got a problem with it. That's wrong. Prove to me it's wrong. Right? And they cannot prove to you from their moral reasoning why it would ever be anything would ever be objectively wrong. The only way that something could be objectively wrong is if there is someone outside of this world who gave us a moral law by which to live by. And we would say that is a much more logical conclusion as to why morality is a worldwide thing that we all sense and know. A fourth argument for the existence of God is what J.P. Moreland down at Biola puts forth, is this idea of the argument from consciousness. Now, I've met J.P. Moreland before, and he is exceedingly smart. And so this is hard for me still to understand, but it is fascinating that the idea making and the realization of your own self-consciousness cannot be explained due to physical features in your brain. Right? You not only know what you're looking at, you understand you're thinking what you're thinking about. You have a level of consciousness that is far beyond anything else in the world. And nothing in nature can explain how you can be a self-conscious being like this. And so he argues the best explanation, since there is no natural explanation, is a supernatural explanation. That we are conscious beings because we were created by a conscious being. An argument from consciousness. A fifth and final argument is simply called the argument from beauty. The argument from beauty. This isn't near as logically solid, as logically tight as some of the other ones are, but it's a very appealing argument nonetheless. Why do we love creative and beautiful things in our world? It doesn't have a usefulness, it doesn't have a utility to us, but why as humans are we drawn to creative and to beautiful things? There's one serious apologetics textbook that says this: the music of Johann Sebastian Bach exists, therefore God exists. Right? Kind of tongue-in-cheek. Like, there is no reason why we would be drawn to something that beautiful if it doesn't reflect something further innate in us, that we were created by someone beautiful and drawn to beauty far beyond just a material explanation. Doesn't make sense of every human's pull towards those things. Now again, none of those five things are proofs of the existence of God. But I hope they help you see that people who believe in God don't just say, well, I have faith and that's it. But there are good and solid reasons for belief in God. Now, I want to end our time together today thinking about this. We're coming down. We've talked about worldview, arguments for God, but now we're going to get to the Christian God. And that's this, is that the God of the Bible is a personal God. The God of the Bible is a personal God. See, the first two points, these last 15, 20 minutes, if you went to any place that teaches Judaism or any place that teaches Islam, they would put forth many, if not all of these exact same arguments. I've not used the Bible intentionally today yet until this point, because I don't want you to think, oh, the argument for existence of God only depends on Scripture. It doesn't only depend on that. But what stands Christianity, what stands the Christian God apart from the God of other religions? Well, largely it is due to the fact that we believe that God is a personal God. This would be contrary to what is known as deism, or belief that God created the world and then has kind of not been involved since then. So he created the world and then he's just kind of left it to flow as is. As if God just kind of looks at us and says, good luck. Good luck. Like, here you go. Good luck making sense. Good luck making it all work. That God being a personal God is also contrary to most Eastern spirituality beliefs of a higher power, right? Where they believe there is something, but it's not something personal that you can know. It's this higher power to experience or to believe in, but not a personal God that you can know and have a relationship with. There's many passages in the Bible where God describes himself, but I think one of the most beautiful and clearest is in the Psalms, in Psalm 103, where Psalm 103, starting at verse 8, says this: the Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. He will not always chide, nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. See, that God and how he describes himself, notice the qualities that God highlights of himself are qualities that must be true and can only be true in a relationship with others, right? God can exist independently as holy and just and righteous, but you cannot exist as someone gracious and merciful and patient and loving and compassionate unless that's a relational thing, right? It's not hard to be a loving person when it's just you in the room by yourself until your kids walk in. Then it can be hard to be a loving and patient person. Right? Like those are relational attributes. And that's the primary way that God describes himself to us as a God who is in relationship with his creation, that he is personal. We believe the God of the Bible teaches that God is both transcendent, meaning he is above all. He's not contingent on us. He's created us. He's outside of our world, but God is also immanent. He is close. He is near to his creation. That God is a personal God that we can know. And what's unique about Christianity is we believe that God is such a personal God that he came in the flesh to save his people. That he's such a personal God and he cares so much about people who he created to be like him and to know him that he came in the flesh to save his people. This is what distinguishes Christianity and the Christian belief in God from every other God and every other belief system in the world. Jesus is described this way in Colossians chapter 1. Starting at verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God. Jesus is the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. That Jesus is a God who wanted to make peace with us. And how does he accomplish it? He came and he made peace by his blood on the cross. See, if you've wondered what Christians believe or why we believe in God, why we believe in Jesus, I hope I've explained in these last few moments. We don't believe that God exists, that Jesus is real, just because the Bible tells us so. Now, the Bible we believe is true. That's in like 4 weeks, something like that. We're going to talk about how you can trust the Bible. But we don't believe just because of that. We don't believe just because in good arguments like we talked about from design or from morality or other things. But if you're a Christian, you've experienced the power of God and the forgiveness of sins in your own life in a way that you cannot measure and fully explain to someone else who has never experienced God in the exact same way. So yes, we have good reasons. We have good reasons for our faith, but we also have a profound experience with the person, Jesus Christ himself. See, Tim Keller, again, put it this way, that there is no watertight proof for belief in God, but there is a watertight person for belief in Christianity. He said, you take everything you want to know to Jesus and it won't let you down. You'll find all you need in him for all the questions, all the doubts, all the things that you have ever faced in life. See, Jesus claims to be God, and he backed it up in how he lived his life. Again, at one of these Google Q&As, I wish Tim Keller was still alive. I would have invited him to come preach today. You can tell I like him a lot. And the last question of one of Tim Keller's Q&As after he gave these talks at Google, which are just fascinating Q&As, right? Because you have these super smart people asking him, and he responds in such intelligent, thoughtful, gracious ways. The last person to get up says, okay, I get your arguments for the existence of God, but I have the proof against you saying this, something is God. I'm God. I'm God, and you can't prove that I'm God, and so you should right now bow down and worship me because I'm declaring to be God. And a smile kind of comes across his face, and he says, okay. But here's the thing. I don't believe that just any human can be God. When I believe that Jesus is God, and so he says, well, here's the thing for you. If you and I watched you live a perfect life, and I knew you for years, and I never saw you make one mistake, and then I saw you publicly killed and 3 days later raised from the dead, and it was seen by hundreds of people, then maybe I would start to think you were God. See, we don't just say Jesus is God because the Bible tells us so. We say Jesus is God because he lived a perfect life, publicly was executed, and then 3 days later was risen from the dead and seen by hundreds of individuals who attested to the true fact of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we can experience the power that God has come to reconcile us to him because he is real and because he sent Jesus to save us from our sin. God, we thank you. We thank you that you do love us so much, that you are not just a God who created the world, but you are a God who is close to your creation, who is so close that out of your love and your grace, your mercy, your compassion, you sent Jesus to die for us. God, I pray that we would live our lives in light of the fact that you are real and in light of the fact that Jesus died for us. We worship you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.